What was one of the purposes that God sent Jesus to earth? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Luke on Walking Through the Bible.
Of His word, the glory of His cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Luke chapter 4. We're going to be reading from verses 38 to 44. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Luke chapter 4, beginning at verse 38. Now he arose from the synagogue and entered Simon's house. But Simon's wife's mother was sick with a high fever, and they made request of him concerning her. So he stood over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. And immediately she rose and served them. When the sun was setting, all those who had any that were sick with various diseases brought them to him, and he laid his hands on every one of them and healed them. And demons also came out of many, crying out and saying, "You are the Christ, the Son of God." And he, rebuking them, did not allow them to speak, for they knew that he was the Christ. Now when it was day, he departed and went into a deserted place. And the crowd sought him and came to him, and tried to keep him from leaving them. But he said to them, "I must preach the kingdom of God to other cities also, because for this purpose I have been sent." And he was preaching in the synagogues of Galilee. Jesus has been teaching throughout Galilee for the latter part of this chapter. We've seen him be rejected in his hometown of Nazareth, but largely accepted in Capernaum. On the Sabbath day in Capernaum, he not only taught among the people in the synagogue, but he also cast out a demon from someone who had one. This demon confessed to the people who Jesus was, but Jesus rebuked him, not wanting people to follow him as a result of a confession from this demon. Coming now to verse 38, we are still on the Sabbath day, with Jesus coming to Simon's house. If we were Theophilus receiving this letter from Luke, we might not understand who this Simon is. Perhaps he's just some guy from the synagogue. That Luke named him, though, seems to be pointing to the fact that whoever this Simon was, he was important, for his name was noted. Of course, we know from studying Matthew and Mark that this Simon was Peter, a disciple and later apostle of Jesus. Why didn't Luke mention that here? Because he hasn't introduced us to Jesus' disciples by name. As we've seen from Matthew and Mark, and we'll see in our study of John, Jesus called his disciples at different times. And from our study of John, we will learn he called some of the same group of men on multiple occasions. Early in Jesus' ministry, Jesus would have had disciples, people who heard him when he taught, but he didn't have what we might call full-time disciples. Since Luke will not introduce us to some of Jesus' disciples until the beginning of chapter 5, we'll leave further discussion on that until then. When Jesus arrives at Simon's house, what he finds there is Simon's wife's mother lying sick with a high fever. This fever would be a serious condition in that time, probably the result of an underlying infection that people could not see. Knowing that Jesus had the power to do something about it, they immediately told him about her condition. Now today, if we have a bit of a fever, we might take some medicine, and hopefully in a day, the fever will be gone. However, if the fever is high enough, even with our modern medicine, it is taken very seriously. Why? Because a fever is not usually what is wrong with your body. It is usually a symptom of something else that is wrong with your body. So without our modern medicine to help, and seeing that Jesus wasn't a trained physician, what these people were asking for was for Jesus to perform a miracle. And that's what Jesus did. Note, to heal the woman, all Jesus did was touch her hand, and the fever was immediately gone, as was whatever caused the fever. It took no effort on Jesus' part, no sweating, no shaking, no yelling to God for assistance in healing her. None of what you see so-called faith healers do today. After being healed, Peter's mother-in-law stood up and began serving them. This shows us the attitude of Peter's mother-in-law. Since she had guests in her house, it is her task to serve them and treat them as honored guests. This woman could have said, "Well, I've been sick for a while, and so I can't serve you today." That's not what she did. She was well, so she did what she would normally do. After sunset, meaning that after the Sabbath was over with its restrictions, people came to Simon's house in order to be healed and to have demons cast out. Recall at the end of our last lesson that a report on Jesus and his teachings had gone out through the surrounding region. It had only been a few hours, but that report had already spread throughout Capernaum, for many people came to be healed. After healing those who came to him and casting out the demons from among those who had them, Jesus sent the multitude away. The next morning, while it was still early, Jesus went to a quiet place. Mark would tell us that Jesus did this in order to pray. Jesus' solitude wouldn't last long, however, for the crowds were still seeking him, wanting him to stay and perform more miracles. Jesus, however, informed them that he couldn't remain in Capernaum forever, for he must go into the neighboring towns also in order to preach the gospel to those people too. He tells them that preaching the gospel was the reason he was sent. Now we know that he had other purposes for coming too, like dying on the cross, but that would only take a small portion of his life. He would spend much more time teaching, preparing the people for the coming kingdom. This saying of Jesus agrees with what he would say later on in Luke, where in Luke 19 verse 10 we read, "The Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost." If Jesus remained in Capernaum, sure, those in Capernaum would have had the gospel, but nobody else would. So Jesus left Capernaum and went and taught in the neighboring cities in Galilee. Some English versions say that Jesus taught in the synagogues of Judea instead of Galilee. The reason for the difference is that some manuscripts say Judea instead of Galilee. There are a couple possible explanations for this. One, there was a copying error from the original, which can happen sometimes. Two, Luke is very quickly telling us of Jesus' early Judean ministry, which really only the book of John covers in great detail. Or three, Judea is not referring to the region of Judea per se, but the country of the Jews, including Galilee. All three options are plausible and would not contradict anything, though Mark tells us that after he left Capernaum, Jesus went throughout Galilee, so perhaps option 1 or 3 is correct here. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.